In the fast-paced world of politics, every second matters, and sometimes the true weight of an exchange lies not in its length but in its impact. The moment when Senator Rubio stopped Crockett just 30 seconds into her remarks is more than a simple interruption. It reflects the heated atmosphere, the struggle for control, and the clash of perspectives that define modern political debate. This incident is not just about two individuals, it symbolizes the broader dynamics of power, influence, and communication in today's political arena. By exploring this moment, we uncover how interruptions shape narratives, how authority is asserted, and how voices are either amplified or silenced in the public sphere. The power dynamics revealed through political interruptions offer a profound window into the way authority, influence, and strategy are exercised in public forums. When a figure such as Senator Rubio cuts off Crockett only 30 seconds into her statement, the act is not merely an impulsive response but a deliberate assertion of dominance within a political theater where control of the narrative is paramount. Interruptions serve as tools, sometimes subtle and sometimes blunt, that reshape the course of discourse by shifting focus away from the speaker's message and toward the interrupter's control over the exchange. This becomes particularly significant in moments of heightened tension, where time is limited and visibility is high, because the one who holds the floor has the power to set the agenda, define the tone, and direct public attention. By intervening early, Rubio was not just preventing Crockett from finishing her thought but was also positioning himself as the authority figure in the moment, signaling to both the audience and his peers that he possessed the right to dictate the boundaries of the conversation. Political interruptions highlight the balance, or imbalance, of power that often defines debates, hearings, and discussions. In these contexts, interruptions often expose the underlying struggle for dominance, as participants seek to reinforce their status, discredit their opponents, or capture the spotlight. For the person being interrupted, it can create an immediate sense of marginalization, as their voice is cut short and their ability to develop an argument is undermined. For the interrupter, however, it can be framed as a demonstration of confidence, authority, or even urgency, depending on how the audience perceives the moment. In this light, Rubio's decision to halt Crockett's remarks before she could even build momentum reflects a calculated effort to neutralize her point before it gained traction, an acknowledgement that in political debate, prevention can be as effective as rebuttal. At the heart of this lies the psychology of dominance. Interruptions in conversation, whether in politics or everyday life, serve as markers of who controls the interaction. Research in communication studies has shown that those who interrupt are often perceived as more authoritative, while those who are frequently interrupted may be seen as less powerful or less competent, even if that perception is unfounded. This creates an environment where interruptions become more than conversational disruptions. They become instruments of influence that shape how participants are judged by their peers and by the public. Crockett's interruption, occurring only 30 seconds into her remarks, is a striking demonstration of this principle in action. The abruptness of it emphasizes not only the weight of Rubio's authority but also the vulnerability of any voice that challenges established hierarchies. These dynamics also tie into gender and political representation. Women in political spaces often face higher rates of interruption than their male counterparts, a phenomenon documented in legislative chambers, boardrooms, and academic discussions. When Crockett is cut off before she has a chance to develop her statement, the moment resonates beyond the individuals involved, echoing broader patterns of how women's voices are managed, curtailed, or diminished in institutional settings. While Rubio's interruption might be framed as a simple procedural or rhetorical move, the optics of silencing a woman so quickly reinforce underlying questions about equality, fairness, and respect in political discourse. It illustrates how power dynamics are not neutral but are deeply intertwined with social structures that shape who is heard and who is silenced. Interruptions also serve as a strategic communication tool, one that is often used to redirect conversations in a way that benefits the interrupter. By stopping Crockett early, Rubio prevented the audience from hearing the full scope of her message. In doing so, he was able to insert his own framing before her narrative could take hold. This tactic can be especially effective in environments where soundbites carry more weight than extended arguments. In an age where audiences consume information in short, fragmented bursts, the first voice to assert dominance often defines the memory of the moment. Rubio's decision to assert himself at the 30-second mark ensured that the exchange would be remembered more for his active interruption than for Crockett's words, thereby shifting the balance of attention in his favor. The act of interruption also lays bare the tension between procedure and persuasion. Political forums are structured around rules of time, order, and decorum, yet the reality of political communication is far messier. Interruptions blur the line between adhering to those rules and bending them to one's advantage. When someone like Rubio cuts off an opponent, he operates within a gray area that can be justified as a procedural necessity while simultaneously functioning as a rhetorical maneuver. This ambiguity gives interruptions their power. They can be defended as legitimate while serving as strategic moves that alter the course of debate. The ability to wield this ambiguity effectively distinguishes seasoned politicians from their less experienced counterparts, as it requires the capacity to assert control while avoiding the appearance of outright suppression. The significance of such moments is amplified by the audience's perception. For some, Rubio's interruption might appear as a strong, decisive action that demonstrates leadership and command. For others, it may come across as dismissive, disrespectful, or emblematic of a refusal to engage with opposing views. The same act, therefore, carries multiple meanings depending on the lens through which it is viewed. This duality is central to the power dynamics of political interruptions, as they are not only about the immediate interaction but also about how that interaction is interpreted and remembered by observers. Crockett's interrupted words may fade, but the image of Rubio asserting himself will remain, framed differently by supporters and critics alike. Power dynamics in interruptions also extend beyond the individuals on stage to the institutions they represent. When a senator interrupts a colleague, it reflects not only personal dominance but also the institutional weight they bring into the exchange. The authority of office amplifies the interruption, lending it a legitimacy that may not exist in ordinary conversation. Thus, Rubio's decision to stop Crockett early was reinforced by the symbolic power of his position, while Crockett's interruption symbolized not just her own silencing but also the challenge faced by those with less institutional backing in trying to make their voices heard. The power imbalance is magnified by the structures within which the exchange takes place, reminding us that interruptions are not isolated acts but are embedded in larger systems of authority and influence. Ultimately, the power dynamics of political interruptions reveal a fundamental truth about communication in high-stakes environments. Control of the floor often matters more than the content of speech itself. The person who can seize, hold, and direct the flow of conversation wields disproportionate influence over outcomes, perceptions, and legacies. In the case of Rubio and Crockett, the interruption at the 30-second mark serves as a vivid illustration of how authority is asserted, how narratives are redirected, and how the struggle for power is enacted not only through words but through the timing and control of speech itself. The impact of silencing on communication and public perception is profound because it alters not only the trajectory of dialogue but also the way individuals and events are remembered. When someone is cut off mid-sentence, particularly in a political setting where every moment is magnified, the silencing does more than interrupt words, it interrupts meaning. The audience is left with an incomplete thought, and in that absence, interpretation rushes in. Silencing functions as both an act and a message, carrying implications that extend beyond the immediate exchange. When Crockett was stopped just 30 seconds into her remarks, the effect was not confined to her inability to continue. It reverberated outward to shape how she was perceived, how Rubio was perceived, and how the broader public interpreted the dynamics of the situation. Silencing undermines the speaker's ability to establish authority, credibility, and coherence. In communication, the power to complete a thought is essential because it allows the speaker to frame their narrative, present evidence, and connect emotionally with the audience. When that power is removed, the speaker is left vulnerable to being seen as weak, unprepared, or ineffective, regardless of whether those perceptions are accurate. Crockett's interruption meant she was denied the opportunity to unfold her argument in her own words, which could leave the public with a skewed or incomplete understanding of her position. This distortion of meaning is one of the most significant consequences of silencing, as it changes the story being told without changing the facts themselves. Silencing also communicates disrespect, both toward the individual being silenced and toward the audience. In political discourse, audiences expect to hear diverse perspectives, even when they disagree with them. When a speaker is cut off prematurely, the audience is denied access to the full range of ideas, which diminishes the quality of the democratic exchange. For some observers, Rubio's interruption may have appeared to be a dismissal of not only Crockett but also of the right of the audience to hear what she had to say. This sends a powerful message about who deserves to be heard and who does not, shaping public perception of the fairness and openness of the political process. At the same time, silencing can backfire by drawing attention to itself. In many cases, the act of cutting someone off becomes more memorable than the content that was silenced. This is because human beings are attuned to dynamics of fairness and respect, and they often react strongly to perceived imbalances. Crockett's words may not have been fully heard, but the fact that she was silenced so quickly created a focal point for attention. Instead of diminishing her visibility, the interruption risked amplifying her position by casting her as someone who was not allowed to speak freely. This paradox is one of the fascinating aspects of silencing. While it can suppress content in the short term, it can also generate sympathy and support for the silenced voice in the long term. Silencing also has deep psychological effects on the person who experiences it. Being interrupted before completing a thought can evoke feelings of frustration, powerlessness, and even humiliation, particularly in high-profile settings where reputation is at stake. In Crockett's case, the experience of being cut off so early in her remarks could have created an internal pressure to appear composed while also grappling with the loss of momentum. This internal conflict is visible to audiences, who often read body language and tone as cues about confidence and credibility. Thus, the act of silencing does not merely remove words from the conversation, it creates ripples that affect both the speaker's performance and the audience's interpretation of that performance. From the perspective of public perception, silencing often reinforces pre-existing biases. Audiences tend to interpret interruptions through the lens of their prior beliefs. Supporters of Rubio may have viewed the act as decisive and necessary, while supporters of Crockett may have seen it as dismissive and unfair. Neutral observers may have drawn conclusions based on their values regarding respect and dialogue. In each case, the interruption became a canvas onto which individuals projected their own attitudes about power, gender, fairness, and authority. This means that silencing is never neutral, it always carries symbolic weight that feeds into broader narratives circulating in society. The act of silencing also exposes the fragile nature of communication in political spaces. Unlike in private conversations, where interruptions may be negotiated informally, political settings are governed by structure, decorum, and public scrutiny. Silencing disrupts the structure of debate, leaving participants and observers to question whether the rules are being applied fairly. When someone is consistently silenced or disproportionately interrupted, it raises concerns about whether their voice is being deliberately suppressed. In this sense, Crockett's interruption does not stand alone but connects to larger conversations about who has access to the floor, how rules are enforced, and whether equality of speech is genuinely upheld. Media coverage amplifies the impact of silencing by framing it for wider audiences. In the case of Crockett and Rubio, the moment of interruption becomes a headline, a clip shared across platforms, a subject for commentary. The silenced content may be forgotten, but the image of the interruption endures, taking on a symbolic life of its own. The media thrives on moments of conflict because they capture attention, and silencing provides a clear visual and narrative of conflict in action. The more the clip circulates, the more the public perception is shaped not by what was said but by the act of not being allowed to say it. This dynamic further entrenches the significance of silencing in shaping public discourse. Silencing also functions as a form of gatekeeping in communication. By deciding when and how someone is cut off, the interrupter exerts control over what information is allowed to enter the public sphere. This raises important questions about the ethics of silencing in political contexts, where the stakes involve not only personal reputations but also public access to information. Crockett's message, truncated at the 30-second mark, was not just her personal loss but also a loss to the audience, who were denied the chance to hear a fully developed argument. In this way, silencing becomes a matter of public consequence, influencing not only perceptions of individuals but also the democratic process itself. At its core, silencing disrupts the natural flow of communication. Human interaction relies on turn-taking, on the implicit contract that each speaker will have the opportunity to express their thoughts. When that contract is broken, the entire structure of dialogue is destabilized. This destabilization can have lasting effects on how participants engage in future exchanges, as those who are silenced may become more cautious, defensive, or reluctant to speak, while those who silence may grow more emboldened. In political discourse, these shifts matter greatly because they influence the balance of voices that contribute to shaping laws, policies, and public opinion. The impact of silencing on communication and public perception is thus multifaceted, involving not only the immediate disruption of dialogue but also the broader implications for fairness, respect, authority, and democratic engagement. It is a reminder that words matter, but so too does the ability to speak them fully, without being prematurely cut short in ways that distort meaning and reshape how individuals are seen by the world. The symbolic meaning of a 30-second exchange in modern politics extends far beyond the literal brevity of the moment. Politics is not only about the policies debated or the arguments made but also about the gestures, interruptions, and performances that occur in real time before audiences. In this context, the act of Senator Rubio stopping Crockett only 30 seconds into her remarks becomes symbolic of larger themes: the struggle for voice in democratic spaces, the speed at which narratives are shaped in a media-saturated world, and the fragile balance between authority and representation. The brevity of the moment makes it striking, almost cinematic, because it condenses into half a minute the tensions that often simmer beneath the surface of political exchanges. The symbolism of the 30-second interruption lies partly in its timing. 30 seconds is barely enough time for a speaker to frame an argument or establish context, yet it was enough for Rubio to intervene and seize control of the exchange. This brevity underscores how quickly authority can be asserted and how fragile the act of speaking can be when placed in a contested space. The symbolism is heightened by the contrast between potential and reality. Crockett had the potential to lay out her thoughts, but reality was shaped by the abrupt intervention. In a way, the moment mirrors broader political realities, where opportunities to speak or act can be swiftly curtailed by those who wield greater institutional or rhetorical power. Modern politics is driven by symbolism because audiences consume political events not only through live interactions but also through clips, headlines, and soundbites. A 30-second exchange is short enough to fit neatly into this media economy, which thrives on brevity and conflict. The symbolism, therefore, is not only in the act itself but also in its suitability for being replayed, shared, and discussed far beyond the original setting. The interruption becomes a symbol of how politics itself is compressed into moments designed for public consumption, where perception often overshadows substance. Crockett's truncated statement may be lost, but the interruption lives on as a symbol of the imbalance between message and medium in contemporary political communication. The moment also symbolizes the broader struggle between established authority and emerging voices. Rubio's interruption represents the authority of seniority, position, and dominance within the political hierarchy, while Crockett's interrupted voice represents the struggle of newer or marginalized perspectives. Attempting to break through. The symbolism of the 30 seconds, therefore, encapsulates a battle not just between two individuals but between the old guard and those seeking to carve space for themselves in the political arena. It is a condensed metaphor for the challenges of representation in modern democracies, where speaking time is both a literal and figurative resource that can be cut short by entrenched power. The symbolic weight of the 30 seconds also ties into broader cultural conversations about respect, civility, and fairness. To many observers, the interruption is not simply about politics but about the norms of human interaction. 30 seconds is long enough to notice an attempt at expression, yet short enough to highlight the lack of patience or willingness to listen. In this way, the moment becomes symbolic of a broader erosion of civility in public life, where listening is sacrificed in favor of control, and respect for one another's voices is overshadowed by the urgency to dominate. The symbolism, then, reaches beyond politics to reflect anxieties about the state of dialogue in society more broadly. At the same time, the 30-second exchange symbolizes the vulnerability of voices in environments shaped by unequal power. Crockett's words were not lost because of their lack of value but because they were cut short by someone with the authority to do so. This reflects how, in many contexts, the ability to speak freely is not evenly distributed but mediated by structures of power that decide whose voice is amplified and whose is silenced. The brevity of the moment makes the imbalance stark. In just half a minute, authority triumphed over expression. The symbolism here resonates with broader struggles for equality, reminding audiences that access to speech and the ability to be heard are often contested rather than guaranteed. The exchange also carries symbolic meaning in its capacity to define memory. Audiences rarely remember lengthy speeches in their entirety, but they do remember moments that stand out for their tension or drama. A 30-second interruption becomes a symbolic marker, a shorthand for the larger debate in which it occurred. The symbolism here is that moments, not minutes, often define political legacies. The entire exchange may have lasted only seconds, yet it becomes the story told afterward, shaping how participants are remembered and how history records the event. The brevity of the moment thus symbolizes the disproportionate influence of small acts in shaping broader narratives. The 30-second cutoff can also be seen as symbolic of the pace of modern politics itself. In an age of rapid communication, viral clips, and instantaneous reactions, 30 seconds feels like an eternity in the digital world. It symbolizes how quickly power can be exercised and how quickly perceptions can change. By intervening so early, Rubio symbolized the speed with which narratives are now constructed, where even a few seconds of speech can be judged, interrupted, and reframed before it has the chance to fully develop. The moment becomes symbolic of a political culture that thrives on immediacy, where patience is scarce and control is asserted in fragments rather than extended dialogues. Symbolism also emerges in the reactions provoked by the interruption. For supporters, the act can symbolize strength, decisiveness, and the refusal to allow opposing views to gain traction. For critics, the same act can symbolize arrogance, silencing, and the erosion of democratic respect. The 30 seconds, therefore, symbolize the polarization of perception itself, where one moment can simultaneously represent two entirely different values depending on the audience's stance. This dual symbolism reflects the fractured nature of modern political life, where unity of interpretation is rare, and every gesture becomes a battleground for meaning. The symbolic meaning of such a short exchange also lies in its universality. While the specific context may be political, the act of being silenced resonates with experiences familiar to many people in everyday life, at work, in school, or in conversations where voices are cut off before they are fully heard. This resonance gives the 30-second exchange a symbolic power that transcends politics, turning it into a metaphor for the human desire to speak and the all-too-common experience of being denied that chance. The audience sees not just Rubio and Crockett but also a reflection of themselves and the broader struggle for recognition in a world where time, attention, and voice are scarce resources. Ultimately, the 30-second interruption symbolizes more than a fleeting moment in a political debate. It symbolizes the fragility of speech in contested spaces, the dominance of authority over expression, the media's appetite for brevity and conflict, and the broader societal tensions around respect, civility, and equality. It serves as a powerful reminder that even the smallest fragments of time in politics carry symbolic weight, capable of representing struggles that extend far beyond the individuals involved.